I am ranting today about criteria, what you're open to and how that affects your wait times in domestic private adoption. There are people who are looking for Caucasian-only children, babies, without any drug exposures. And I wanted to talk about that because it's getting more difficult, and nobody should talk you into something that you are not prepared for and open to and have the tools for, which we're going to talk about. But the reason I say it's getting harder and harder, and actually some agencies just aren't even taking any more people on their lists that are only open to Caucasian with no drug exposures. And the reason is, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that we have a severe opioid crisis in America. And it's affecting adoptions as well. Well, a lot of babies are being put in foster care, and also birth moms are making the decision to place for various reasons. But the opioid crisis is a white problem. And I want to challenge you to perhaps open up. I always say go into the adoption process with an open heart and an open mind. And that openness may start right at the beginning of thinking about what you're open to and what your criteria will be. And I'm talking about exposures, and I'm talking about race, perhaps, and research is certainly a big part of this. So perhaps being exposed to opioids may not be as scary as you think. I always say to have a doctor as part of your team so that you can have a conversation with somebody who knows what they're talking about medically. From what I have learned, and maybe there aren't enough studies on this yet, and I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to drugs, but from what I've learned and from what I've heard from my own clients is that typically there is a 2-week, anywhere from 1 to 3 week withdrawal period that's really difficult for the parents and the child. And then they seem to do well, the children, after that. Perhaps there may be some learning issues or added anxiety or low birth weight. And again, just through your own research, you decide what you are equipped to handle or not. But because the opioid crisis is so huge right now, and it's a white problem more than anything, it's interesting because they said one of the reasons the opioid crisis is a white problem is almost because doctors are discriminating against non-white clients, not prescribing opioids to Black and Hispanic people in fear that they'll become addicted. And luckily, in this sense, it's working for them, that it's better for them. But it's interesting that that was one of the reasons given. So perhaps some things are not as scary as you think. And that goes on to adopting outside of your race as well. So I know a lot of people are scared about adopting outside of their race and may think that they are not prepared to do so because of a community that you live in. Maybe there's not a lot of mirrors around. And that is definitely something to consider. And again, nobody should talk you into anything that you're not prepared for. But here's another area where openness may begin. If you think about adopting transracially, you need to have the right tools in place. You need to know that you are willing and open to seek out diversity in your community. And frankly, everyone should be doing this, not just transracial families. We need to be doing this to help prevent racism. We need to be embracing different races and diversity with our children, whether our families are all white or transracial. We need to find mirrors for our children. And adopting transracially is work. It takes effort. Are you open to putting in that effort and putting in that work? And I'll tell you, if you do, it certainly creates a much richer experience and a much richer world for yourselves as well as for your child, if you're willing to do that. And being as prepared as you possibly can by doing these things. And what I mean is that we can't just forget that our children are a different color than us. There are stereotypes that come along with that. There are consequences that come along with that. And we need to know what those are to be able to have those conversations with our children. And frankly, whether you adopt transracially or not, being open in adoption means being open to having hard conversations. Being open in adoption means listening and not dismissing. Listening to what our children are feeling and experiencing. And instead of telling them, no, that's not happening, or the world doesn't feel that way about you, listen and encourage them to keep talking and validate their feelings. Being open means being open to the fact that a good school, quote unquote, may not be a good school for your child, especially if they're of another race than you in a community that looks all the same, primarily the same way. Being the only child of color in a school probably is not a good school for that child. And are you open to that? And being open is to allow your child to have his or her story and to be able to figure that out for themselves. And again, you listening and not dismissing. So I want you to think about what your criteria is. Perhaps you might be more open than you thought you were. I would challenge you to sit with that and to think about, can we be parents to a child of a different race? Can we be open to drug exposure? It feels scary, but maybe it's okay, and maybe it's something that you can handle. And in some cases, in many cases, these two, exposure to substances and transracial are more difficult to match. And there's a need out there. And if you can really do the research and sit with it and dig deep and think about these things that I just shared with you, and you think, you know what, we are equipped to handle this. And we are open to putting in the work, then perhaps you could bring your baby home quicker. Now, is that the point of adoption? No. But it's also statistically true. So I don't want you to just make decisions haphazardly as far as what your criteria are to adopt. I want you to really sit and think about what it means as far as your timeline, as far as what you're prepared to bring in, as far as your level of openness and the work that you're prepared to put in. And again, no matter what color child you are adopting, having hard conversations, listening and not dismissing, letting your child come up with their story and being there to support them and hold them up and figure it out, even though it's messy, and not always coming to their rescue. Considering that a good school may not be a good school for your child. These are all things that we all need to think about in adoption. Adoption is not a time to be making quick decisions. It's not a time to close, have hard and fast rules. You have to be able to go with the flow. You have to open your heart, you have to open your mind, and you have to be willing to do the tough work. So I hope this